Hey, what's up, y'all? Hope you guys been doing well. I got another story for you guys today. And in light of college recently starting back up and folks re-entering back into school starting, I wanted to talk about another story that I have. Actually, a very daunting and basically traumatic moment in my life that I that man, even thinking about this time period, man, I feel like I get like the shivers just thinking about this time period. But today, I want to talk about how I ended up getting a 1.79 GPA in college, after spending all the money and resources to go to school. I think this one's going to be interesting. And if you know my story and if you've seen some of my other videos, you know that my story doesn't end there. But, after college, I do end up just becoming a construction worker and not getting a job. Then that proceeds to my journey of learning how to program and learn code. But before all that, the story, I think, in my personal opinion, really does start with these beginning days of really bombing college really hard. Um, and to be honest, I think that even though looking back now, right, even though it sounds incredibly terrible, I think I had a lot of highlights, a lot of goods, a lot of bads. And I just want to talk about the story of how I got to that point. How does someone even manage to get those kind of grades and give you the statistics like how many A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's I got, kind of a rundown of what a day in life of a student that gets that sort of GPA ends up how their day looks day in and day out, right? And so I figured this would be interesting. And in the end, if you're interested, of course, I got it. It wasn't all bad, and I just want to be able to talk about it, talk about what I learned, and be able to provide at least some motivation. Because that was definitely a long time ago, and I definitely learned a lot since then. And in the end, it wasn't the end of the world, and just want to be able to talk about that a little bit. Okay, so to first start, right, I think the most important part to start is like, how did I even choose the school I went to? What was like my life like before college, and how I ended up in this position in the first place, right? So I mentioned some of my other videos, but I grew up super low income. My parents at the time was a lunch lady, and then a lunch lady, and then my dad was a Safeway grocery store cook. They both did not have college. They both, I think my dad probably finished sixth grade or some of his. The story is like he didn't even finish middle school type of thing. They're both immigrants to this country, and I grew up in an environment where, even till this day, my school, probably the high school I went to, ranks like I think in the bottom 10 percentile in math. And so that's kind of where I was. I was in a graduating class of about 400 kids, and I was one of probably maybe 15 students that went to a true 4 year university straight out of school. And like most kids, I had no idea what I was going to do, but I actually had an idea of what school I wanted to go to. The school that I wanted to go to in the end was the University of Oregon. I'm a big Ducks fan. It's just the college to go to when you grow up in Oregon. And my one of my best friends, actually a couple of my best friends were all going there. Although my school had such a low like 4 year college graduation rate, graduation rate in general, um, and placement score rate. I was lucky enough to be friends with the folks that did go to college. And so I think that in the end was one of the best things I ever did in college. So I ended up, entering school. First really weird red flag choice that I made with my buddy was that we ended up deciding not to stay in the dorms. Looking back, that was probably a huge mistake, mainly because it's really odd to go to a 4 year school and not stay in the dorms because you literally can't meet anybody. You're surrounded by upperclassmen and you look like a little kid when, like, at least for us, right? We look like little kids more than even those that were like in their 20s. They were still pretty young, but like we look like little kids first year out. But the main reason behind that was because it saved a lot of money. So it was mainly a financial reason where you would living in the dorms getting the meal plan. That was probably like I think it was like $2,000 a month or something like that. Whereas at the time I got an apartment for about 400 per person, splitting between one of my buddies. And so when it red flag number two, right, was like keep in mind, right, my grades weren't good going into college. The school that I went to I think the acceptance rate is really high. And so even though the acceptance rate was really high, I was one of the last kids to be able to get accepted, right? I waited forever. I was probably on the last round of acceptance. And I scored below average on pretty much all my test scores except for writing for some reason. And looking back, right, I think I'm actually an incredibly terrible writer, but some odd reason I decided to take like a SAT prep course for writing, just writing, and that boosted my score incredibly high. But pretty much everything else I scored below average, like I think 40 percentile, something like that. So freshman year, I go to college. I was incredibly. I always knew I wanted to be an engineer of some sorts. I didn't know what. Growing up in that environment, the closest people I knew that were engineers were probably mechanics and people that worked on cars. So I thought I'd maybe do maybe mechanical engineer or something like that, maybe electrical. However, the problem was that I went to a liberal arts school that did not have an engineering school. So I decided, but they did have a pre-engineering program, which is where you major in one of the STEM sciences, such as like a math, physics, something like that, and then you end up getting a degree, and then you'll transfer out into an engineering school at a rivaling college, and then finish your last, have all your prereqs, and then do your last like 2 years or so in that college. And so that was my plan going into it, right? And so the major I ended up picking was physics. I picked the applied physics route, and the plan was to be able to get a math minor because it's super math heavy, and then get a physics degree, and then transfer, and then in 3 years, and go to another college which with an engineering with their partnering engineering program, and then do some sort of engineering there. All right, so a little bit more background on this before I jump further into the day in my average day in college. I ended up. What's funny is like I never even took a physics class before entering college. My school did not even have physics offered. My high school, and so I was literally majoring in something that I had absolutely nothing. I absolutely didn't know a single thing about it other than the fact that I was going to learn a lot of foundational engineering, math skills, that kind of stuff. And so I definitely personally didn't have any logic, real logic, other than it was like one of the three availables. And then like thinking back, it was probably one of the hardest majors you can possibly pick. And I was literally basically a kid from the hood that never took a physics class in my life, thinking that I was going to major in physics, right? So the year start, I started my year off, first year, basic physics class, living in an apartment as a freshman. And I get a below 2.0 my first semester, which then extends me into academic probation. And that's when it hits me right away I realized that I was nowhere near as smart as I thought I was. And personally it put me into a really dark kind of cycle and self-reflection and how I was gonna manage through this and work through this, right? I ended up doing a little bit better the next term, and got a ended up getting like a low 2.0. And then that cycle continues, right? The cycle continues where I continually every other semester I'll get a below 2.0 GPA, which puts you in academic like probation warning standing. And how my school worked is if you ever got two of those in a row, you'd end up having to drop all your classes and then do like community college, aka they'll basically suspend your enrollment. And that was the biggest fear I personally had, right? My biggest fear in my life was being able to go, tell my immigrant parents that I was like on the cusp of dropping out, or if that did end up happening, my biggest fear was having to tell them with the money that they're paying and supporting me through those time periods, to tell them like, hey, like, I couldn't finish college. I'm gonna go to I got my enrollment got withdrawn, and like I don't even know, right? That was like my biggest fear at that time. And this cycle continued, right? I was taking all these classes. There were no cupcake classes. A lot of math, a lot of science, and every other semester I would end up getting an academic probation, coming back into good standing with a barely scraping by with a 2.0. And luckily enough for me, I ended up in the 4 years that I ended up doing that. I didn't end up getting expelled, or my academic standing did not get withdrawn from the university. But overall, right, we're talking like failed classes every single day, every single semester, withdrawing from classes, literally bombing them, taking electives to try to boost my GPA up. And that was kind of the life that I lived every day. I mean, overall, right? I like couldn't sleep because of my school, because how bad I was doing in school. I even started seeing counseling for a really long time because I mean one of the hard ups and downs that I had was I I honestly thought I was like had like an issue with learning. And so I remember seeing a counselor and trying to understand, where this was coming from. And one of the really, really bright spots that I ended up having, and of course, like in the classroom, right, with my classmates, I barely made any friends with like my pre-engineering buddies. Nobody. I was like that kid that sat in the back that was bombing all the classes. Like I remember one embarrassing moment, right? You know how most science classes they're usually on a curve, and I was taking one class, and I remember the professor writing 14 out of 100. All right. And that was the bottom curve for a D. And so that was one of those classes. Luckily for me, it was like the curves were so strong because it was such a difficult class that basically the lowest score was a D. And I remember looking 14 out of 100, and I looked at my test score, and I was the person that got the 14 out of 100. This is like a 20-person class, so I doubt anybody got any less. And I remember my classmates, like my classmates next to me just like gasped, like, oh shoot, who got 14 out of 100? And it was a little funny moment where, those moments where you're like scared to show you're scared to show your piece of paper to anybody else. But at that point, I was already kind of like deep into the curriculum. So it was pretty obvious that I was probably the person that got the 14 out of 100. And, I'll be honest, I think that one thing, looking back, right, looking at the curves, one thing that I did help a lot of folks with is I was probably the person that was setting the lowest test score in every single class. So I was helping sway the curve a lot more. So if you're out there and you remember me in any of your classes and you're doing something amazing now, and you remember that kid bombing all those classes and swaying the curve a lot, you're welcome. In all seriousness, right? But that was kind of my day. A lot of late nights trying to cram, a lot of late nights, days spent at the library, just so far behind. And the way I would describe this is that the curriculum stacks on top of each other, even very minorly. Like every math class you take, every science class I took, there was like previous topics that like they would kind of just stack and add up. Like you needed to know something else before you can take the next one. And because I was getting D's and C minuses and F's in a lot of them, I was barely scraping by, moving to the next curriculum, but I wouldn't have those foundation down. So like let's say year 3 of college, I was like 2 years behind already, and I was playing, and I never, like from day 1 I never was able to play catch up or have a moment to myself to reflect back on, how I was learning things, or if my learning plan was good, or just even being a young dumb kid, I couldn't even really piece together some of those, why I was doing bad or why I was doing good or whatever it may be, right? And so that's kind of how my day went, day in, day out. To kind of summarize this, I actually made out all the statistics from my college. So in the end, I took 56 classes total. I got 19 C's. Majority of those were C minuses, 6 F's. I was a hard-headed kid that refused to just drop the class. I'd rather just bomb the class. And I was like, I think it was probably $1,500 a credit at that time, something like that, or a class at that time, maybe a little more. So imagine 6 times, let's just say 2,000 with books and time spent and whatever class prices. I mean, I probably spent 10K just getting F's, if not more. And then I had 6 D's. Out of that, I had 6 total A's, 5 of which were from electives, which were for fun classes like art, product design. I took a lot of art classes, and one of the reasons why was because I ended up going to a counselor. So again, right, I really didn't have a lot of foundation or anybody I can look up to do well. And so which I should have done a lot sooner, was going to a guidance counselor. And my guidance counselor kind of set me up in a way that gave me a plan to like be able to basically boost my GPA with like some of the easiest courses in the school, and that literally floated me by and kept me in decent standings. And so, and then my final A, which was an A minus, which is actually one of the most traumatic stories of getting this A minus, was in one of the math classes I took, differential equations, which looking back, that was a difficult class, but it wasn't this hard. I ended up taking this class 3 times over again, which is unbelievable. I got F's twice in that class and I ended up getting an A minus. And in what world do you take a class twice and still get an F? I have no idea. I think at the time, like I think that class in itself just explains the mindset that I was in. Refusing to refusing to drop the course, or not understanding when or recognizing when I should drop the course. Taking it again and still not recognizing that how far behind are the skills that I truly needed to succeed in that class. Almost like an illusion that I was doing better than I thought I was. And then finally clicking after the third time. I mean, we're talking $5,000 at that point on one math class just to finally get that A in that course. And so, and then to continue with the stats, I had 15 semesters out of those 4 years. By the way, I didn't finish in 4 years. I actually, for my 5th year, I decided to actually go ahead and start working, because I was missing a couple credits, and I took those credits remote just so I didn't have to be at the university for my final year, do another year just to make up the last couple credits, which and it turned out to be actually a really great idea. And so I ended up taking 15 true semesters in my college career. 5 of those were on academic probation and warning. So if you kind of do the math, it was like, I don't know, 1 out of 3, I was in academic probation. So again, if I ever got 2 of those in a row, which I luckily never got, I would have gotten expelled. So luckily that didn't happen. But you can kind of see the the lifestyle that I was living day in and day out. Overall, right? I wouldn't say that overall, right? In the end, like I wouldn't say that I was a huge partier, although I did go out, meet friends, had a good time. But I was definitely not on the crazy. I was definitely not on the crazy end of things. And looking back, right, one thing that actually really helped me, one thing that I always think back on, and the luckiest thing that happened to me was I don't think I would have been able to finish if I wasn't able to meet one of my best friends, even till this day, which did not happen to be in the major at all. He was a product design major, Charles, and that became my library buddy to go to the library. And man, I was just so lucky to be able to meet him in one of my electives later in my college career, because I think that was what I was missing for a really long time. When you're like the worst student in the class, nobody really wants to work with you. And of course, it's like, even if I joined learning groups, which I tried, or go to tutoring or whatever it may be, I was literally like the student that was dragging everybody down because I was so far behind. And so, lucky enough to meet someone that was outside of my major, that didn't have that judgment and didn't, worry about like my grades, and meeting through more of a social setting. Him and I really went to the library every single day and put in the hours, and naturally able to develop some sort of like study plan, that kind of stuff. Although he didn't help me study, right? It was just literally us doing our work on our own time. Just being able to even show up was a really big blessing of mine. And I can't thank him enough to be able to, do that for me during those periods. But it is what it is. Of course, ended up leaving college, not getting any job, of course. And oh, by the way, of course, at the end, I didn't finish in that 3 years. I didn't end up getting my math major, which is math minor. And this is how crazy I was. I was actually how crazy it was. I was actually only one course away from getting my math minor, but it was like an upper division math course, and I already knew, like, I didn't even want to take the chance of that at the end. And so in the end, I was one class away from my minor, and I decided not to take that class, just because I knew I was gonna have to take it 2 or 3 times before I passed. So I didn't end up doing that. And then because my major GPA was 1.79, I actually had to write an essay. And this is where I got incredibly lucky with graduation. So because when you have below a 2.0, in my school, they don't actually give you your degree unless you create some sort of petition. And in my very last year of school, or very last couple semesters, I started going to my counselors a lot. I was so close to graduating. I was explaining my situation to them. And um, one lucky thing for me was that I decided to go pursue a career. And so even though I was working a construction job, in that first couple months of working that construction job, I finished up all my courses. And what I ended up doing with my professor or my academic advisor, was like giving him proof that, hey, I was working, even though it was a blue collar work, I was working out in the field, which shows a lot of accomplishment. And I guess it gives a good outcome for the school. And I had to write a letter explaining my situation. And a lot of that talk, I started talking about, having work and being out in the real world. And they ended up granting me my degree with the 1.79, which, I mean, I didn't even know. I think till this day, I've never heard of someone actually having to write an essay and go in front of a board. I mean, this was like a process. Like, I had to write an essay. I had to there had to be like a admission, like a graduation board that I was pitched to, and all that stuff. I had to get references from like my work. I had to get references from, and another thing, right? It was like, I when I was looking for a job, I sold myself as someone that had a degree, and I was lucky enough to be able to still get those references. After I explained my situation to my construction job, they were able to, my leaders were able to have them there. I don't even know if they called them, but they were more than willing to put me down as one of the references, and needed to communicate with them if the school needed to. Okay, so um looking back, right, like, this might have seemed like the worst thing in the world, which I personally absolutely thought it was the worst thing in the world. But looking back, there was actually a lot of positives that came out of this, right? A lot of positives, a lot of negatives that came out of this is, of course, getting bad grades, my degree pretty much being useless, but and of course not actually learning anything in college like what I was supposed to learn. But coming out of this, there is a lot of positives, and I look back to those moments, and I think back as to, how grateful, and I definitely do not regret going through that adventure. I think for me, like, shifted college shifted from being something that I was going to get this degree certification, learn this topic, and then go out to the real world to, pursue that topic, into just basically one big resilience building tool, right? I never once changed my major, and I just went after a difficult degree and something that I wasn't even interested in, and just fell on my face every other semester. Every semester, even if I didn't get on academic probation, I was still getting 2.1s, 2.2 GPA semesters, falling on my face, getting back up, falling on my face, getting back up. And it just became one large resilience builder that caused me a lot of reflection and thinking as to who I was and what I wanted to become and what I was truly after, right? And although I never caught up during my time in college, that those lessons in itself really, really, I think, personally set the foundation. And if you've seen some of my other videos, you know that after college, I worked my construction job and started teaching myself how to code, which really actually started at the end of college as I was like thinking about what I wanted to do. But that resilience, I think, was what really set me up to be able to, do that extra effort where I was working that job. But I already knew there was like, these 40 skills that I didn't have, and I had to relearn these skills, like how to learn something, how to teach myself how to learn something, what type of like curriculum plan, what I'm good at, what I'm bad at, the way I'm able to absorb information, all those questions. I knew I didn't have the answers to them, but I knew that I needed to be able to put the effort into relearning those things. Looking back, right, man, I really thought I was like really dumb or something like that. And a lot of that, I think there was two aspects that came from. Number one was like doing comparisons with other students. Like, I would see these students get good grades, and like, of course, I'd be like, yeah, these people probably put in more time than me. But what I didn't recognize was like how much more time they were actually putting in and how much of like a relationship they were building with the professors, how much effort they were truly putting in, and just being able to simply make that comparison, like, hey, they got an A. I just thought I was like much dumber than them, and I thought they were picking up the material super quick. But in fact, I think that most students were still struggling, and the thing was that they were just putting in a lot more effort than I was. And in secondary, I realized that I wasn't dumb in the end, and that's because through my programming journey, I, and learning how to code afterwards, I recognized that I just needed to take some time to just slow down, learn my fundamentals, build a foundation, and from day one of college, I think that was a major lack. And as they compounded throughout the semesters, it made it pretty much impossible to really catch up and figure that out, right? And so I think if I looked back, one thing that I wish I would have done and wish I was brave enough to do was to put a pause on certain things, or just like put a pause on certain things and figure out and learn those fundamentals and why I was missing and how I was missing those pieces, right? And I think I would have been a lot better when it comes to I would have been a lot better at moving forward. And I just kept on thinking ahead, like, how am I going to do in the next class or the next course? And I didn't even take a step back and think about, like, hey, this is what my learning plan looks like. This is how often I need to go to the library. This is how I need to leverage the book versus looking for resources on YouTube, or that kind of thing, right? I was just consistently trying to look forward, comparing myself to other students, and that was definitely doing me no good. And so that was definitely a big one. I think there's a lot of value in being able to finish, even finishing last, right? Like, I can probably truly say that I was one of the few students that like actually finished last in college. I mean, like, outside of just bombing all my courses and getting bad grades, I mean, I didn't have any internships. I didn't even apply to any internships. I did like some work study stuff, but that was to just have money. But I didn't have any real, like, I didn't do any internships. I didn't do any mentorship. I didn't find any mentors. I didn't join any clubs at the school. I mean, I was just like one of the many numbers. I was just one of the many number students in the large university, and I wasn't associated with anything, just because I was trying to like basically keep myself afloat every single day. So, but there's a lot of value in finishing. And even though I had to crawl to the finish line, like literally with the water all the way up to my nose, right? The value of finishing, I definitely don't regret doing that. And unfortunately for me, right, I think in the end, that's what college ended up being, was one big resilience building tool for myself. And um, in the end, I think that now that I'm deep into my career, that's something that everyone needs to learn eventually, is to be able to build that level of resilience. If you want to be able to, especially if you're, out there pursuing your goals and passion, you're going to run through the hard points. And I can't tell you how many people I know stop a little bit too soon because things get difficult. And that journey in itself, taught me not taught me when not to give up, basically. And that's something I'm really grateful for. And of course, being able to meet some of my best friends during that period of time is something I'm incredibly grateful for. So in the end, I think, I mean, of course, it wasn't worth my degree is a piece of paper that I don't use ever. And I was able to summon alternative reasons as to why I went to college, which arguably may be actually better reasons, a little bit of that wake up call. But in the end, I think what I learned is that really your dreams don't end with bad grades or doing bad in a class, right? Like, it might hurt you, it might prevent you from, getting into a better grad school or finding a better job. But that's definitely not the end. It really is not the end until you stop moving forward, even if you're at crawling pace. And I'm someone that had to learn that the hard way. But I think sometimes the journey just isn't linear, right? Most of our journey isn't linear, and I think it's very easy to market and see it as it is linear. But I think the fun and rewarding part is to be able to discover and learn about yourself when things don't go quite as smoothly. So, if you're struggling out there in school or in real world, wherever it may be, if you're figuring out your life, right? It's not the end yet, right? Just because something went wrong, something major went wrong, it doesn't mean it's the end of the world, right? Understand what you can learn from that, pick yourself back up, and keep on moving forward. I hope that was helpful. If not, I hope that at least that was a little bit of a funny story, right? And if you have any questions for me, please let me know. If not, I'll talk to you on the next one. Latest.